Welcome to Envision More. Here, we dig deep into the insights of first-generation wealth builders, unearthing stories of passion, resilience, and relentless vision. Your host is Wayne Wagner Jr., founder of Visionary Wealth Management. So sit back and dig in. It's time to envision more.
Hi, this is Wayne Wagner, president of Visionary Wealth Management. Welcome to another episode of the Envision More podcast. This is episode 2 of a mini series we're doing on actual financial planning in each decade of your adulting life. So episode 2 is going to be on planning in your 30s. So we're going to be talking about generally what kinds of things, how should you be thinking about and approaching personal development, professional development, and most importantly, financial development in your 30s. This is a part of a mini series we're doing within the podcast on planning from your 20s to your 70s. So we'll see if we're going to put together a number of these episodes focused on kind of decade by decade. And look, this is not a one size fits all. This is kind of generally in the decade of your 30s. Here's some things you're going to be facing. And you may be, hitting some of that stuff in your 20s. You may be hitting some of that stuff in your 40s. But regardless, we're aiming it kind of at a decade by decade basis. So let's dive in. For many of us in our 30s is really where home and professional lives really began to, we started to have some conflict because in our 20s, we were doing jobs. We weren't given a lot of responsibility in our 20s because we didn't have a lot of expertise. We talked in the episode on the 20s about becoming a person who can add value to the marketplace, value to your employer. And we're going to talk about that more today. But in your 30s is where kids frequently start to come into the mix. If you didn't get married in your 20s, frequently in your 30s, you're picking a spouse, you're cohabitating with someone, and our view of kind of work starts to encroach because we're being given more. We have more ability, more capacity, and so we're being given more responsibility at work. And so frequently, work time is trying to encroach, maybe start a little earlier, end a little later, have to come back to emails late in the evening, that kind of thing. Just about the time that kids are coming into play, and it's amazing to be present and be there for all those early firsts that happen with our children. And then when they age up a little bit and they get into little league sports and travel sports and all that kind of stuff, life outside of work takes over everything. But in your 20s, again, you're gaining some experience, some expertise, but now that you're in your 30s, you're being given responsibility. And so this is a crucial decade of life to be thinking about the existential questions of life. We kind of ended the 20s talking about these existential questions. In the 30s, they have got to be top of mind. Who am I trying to become? What do I want the outcome of my life to be? Where am I going? What does a good life look like? And why am I doing this? That why, and that why is what gives us motivation to continue. Now, I have found over time that why for me was very rear wheel. It was rear wheel motivated. So if you think about a car that's rear wheel drive versus front wheel drive, is the acceleration pushing the car forward or pulling the car forward? And for me, my whys had a lot to do, and it even goes to my own personal mission statement, which has a lot to do with carrying influence as I get older. But my why was very much a rear wheel drive. I had a couple people in my sphere who had very volatile tempers, and I wanted to be someone who did not emulate those characteristics as a person. I had people in my sphere, my family and extended, that they either didn't have a lot of money or didn't know what to do with money, and so I wanted to become someone who understood how to generate revenue, how businesses function, how revenue function. And I wanted to know what to do with that money to make the world a better place. And was that give it away, or was it invest it? Was it save it? Was it, how was I to apply the resources that I had to accelerate, and then, kind of accelerate in what direction? Is these other questions around who I'm trying to become, what I want the outcome of my life to be, where am I going, what does a good life look like? But understanding our motivations, and understanding that our motivations, and I'll talk about a little bit about kids here. And this is something I've said in a variety of environments, but when we are middle schoolers, we are at a particularly vulnerable moment in our lives where we're starting to interact with media and listen to media's voices. We're also questioning who we want to become, whether we can articulate it or not. And we don't have a very positive, like, we don't have an articulate knowledge of what that image is of who we want to become. But we do have a sense of what we don't like around us, right? And here's the risk. Here's the big risk. The big risk when you're in middle school, junior high, is that, like, I don't know who or what I want to become, but I know I don't want to have a temper like that guy. I don't want to be a weak leader like that boss, like that coach. I don't want to have a limiting mindset like that person. And so we pick out the influential people in our lives and we begin to label them with their negative characteristics. And that's happening against the backdrop of a media that virtually every media show or content that our kids take in has the dad as a bumbling idiot, the mom as too busy, too disconnected, too tied down. Very, very infrequently do we see positively functioning two-parent households where there's investment in the children and dialogue. It's very, very infrequent that we see that. And the ones the shows that we do see that have that, especially the ones that go over generations, frequently have long legs because they're actually very popular, but it's just not a popular message coming from media. And we can have conspiracy theorist conversations at another time about why we think that is, why the media puts out that messaging. But the bottom line is, it's very, very easy for us to paint our mentors when we're young, or to paint the people who should be our mentors or could be our mentors, and define them by their negative characteristics. The real risk then is that we undervalue their positive characteristics, and therefore their positive impact that they can have on us, because we're constantly identifying them or labeling them by their negative characteristics. This is something that I've done with marginal success with my own kids, is that very early on, we kind of normalized our kids criticizing May and I. And it wasn't criticizing because we wanted to teach them to be able to make a derogatory comment to a person in authority. It was a normalization of a conversation about something they were seeing in our personality or our character that they did not want to emulate. And when we can normalize that, a very overt one for Bryce, when he was 15, 16 years old, he came to me and said, "Hey, Dad, you're this influential guy. You're a big personality. And I find myself with a very long list of positive attributes about you. And you're the fat guy in every room you walk into. And I think you lack credibility when you walk into the room because you're the fat guy. And I don't have the experience or years of expertise that you have, but if I lose my weight," because he was a big guy at the time too, "I think I can buy and pull forward some of the credibility by being the fit guy that walks into the room." Man, for a 15, 16-year-old to be able to articulate that, be able to put that together, to be able to have a safe place to be able to have that conversation with the fat guy in the room, is one of my wins as a dad. That'll always be one of my big wins as a dad, because that to know that I created a place safe enough for my son to have that direct of a conversation with me, that critical of a conversation with me. But what that's given birth to is a relationship where we can give and take not in a derogatory fashion, always in a positive and affirming and growth minded fashion about my ability to pour into him and the positive and negative attributes that he sees in me. And that allows us to stay tethered. So now he's 20 years old and we're able to have great dialogue and communication. I should be one of the loudest voices, one of the most influential voices in my son's life, in my daughter's life. But how we approach that has a lot to do with our ability to stay tethered to them through these growth years. And so much of that is stemming directly from these existential questions around who is it that I'm trying to become? What is it that I want to be the outcome of my life? Where am I going? What does a good life look like? And fundamentally, first principles, why am I doing this? Like, why do I desire to be a good dad? Why do I desire to be a good husband? Why do I desire to be a good employee? Asking those fundamental questions. But if you haven't done the hard work on that in your 20s, by the time you get to your 30s, man, you want to set aside some time. You want to do some journaling on this. You want to have some conversations with people who are a little bit further down the road, people who seem to be kind of settled in who they are. And there are people who I have encountered and who I still encounter who are, you meet them and you just know that they function with a quiet sense of settledness and confidence. And if you have people like that in your life, those are the people that you want to go buy a cup of coffee for and ask some of these questions. How did you get that? Ask them what their answers to these questions are, and then start to work backwards into, well, how do I think about that? How do I function in this? That will empower you to do something that very, very few families do. And I have some personal relationships, and you've heard them come out on the podcast repeatedly. But this idea of family branding, where when you go through those existential questions, you are developing kind of a personal mission for life, like what you want life to look like. You're developing your own sense of purpose. And then you're establishing, whether you actually take the time to specifically articulate it or not, you're establishing some core values, that kind of missions to live, or words to live by. So there's most of us have seen an episode or two of NCIS, and Agent Gibbs has his kind of rules. And throughout the show, there's this kind of rule 1, rule 32, rule 73, that kind of, I don't know if it goes up to 73, but he's got these rules that he lives by, and it's built off of his life experience, where some of these core values are kind of like Gibbs' rules to live life by. And so when you're in your 30s, if you take that to the next level and you start to apply that same sense of mission, purpose, and core values, you can begin to create that and craft that in the context of your family. So it's not just a who am I trying to become, but it's a who are we trying to become? How do we want to show up in the world? And the key for this is that so I was in Wawa, so it's just an East Coast thing, although it's becoming a national brand. But I was in Wawa yesterday, and there were two boys that were maybe, I'm going to say 9 and 10 years old, two obviously brothers, and mom's there, and mom is stressed out. She's strained. She's having a hard time just holding things together. You can tell that there's a lot of stress on her. The way you can tell there's a lot of stress on her is how she's interacting with her sons. One of the sons had gotten a slushie. He spilled a little bit. He shows up next to mom. It's running down his hand. Her response to him is, "What is wrong with you? What is the matter with you? She's angry. She's really like people are starting to look around, and his brother sees that he spilled like a half a cup of the slushy across the middle of the floor, and the brother hops to and runs and grabs a couple of napkins. I go and grab another dozen napkins because he's not going to have enough, and so he and I are, brother and I are down there on the floor mopping up the slushy, and the brother saying thank you so much, and then the little guy whose slushy it was came over and thanked me for helping him clean up. But as a parent, I think we've all had that. We've all had that moment where we're in public. Yeah, it could be on a plane and our kids screaming. It could be in a grocery store when the kids, wants that super sugary candy that we don't want them to eat, and they're laying on the ground, yelling. We've all had that moment of stress, and what we want to come out, what can tend to come out is something that's just so overly harsh. What's wrong with you? And I felt for that mom because I know every parent's been in that moment at some point. And the only way to not have that ugly come out is for us to be living personally by a set of core values. And it's not a it's not a it's not to specifically avoid those moments, but it is to bring accountability and affirmative recognition to the moments in our lives where we show up, or bring bring accountability to one another in this. So let's paint that picture a bit differently for that mom and those boys. If there's conversations going on in the home, hey, we're Wagners, we clean up our messes. And if that's something that's been talked about, we clean up after ourselves. Um, then when we're in a stressful pressure situation like that, where mom's at the end of a shift, they're just trying to get home to get a little food on the table, and the son spills something across the floor, and it's, hey, son, hey, we're Wagners. We clean up our messes. Let's go. And it's we're doing this together because this is who we are. We don't leave our messes for somebody else to clean up. We clean up our own messes. I've had, and there's so many times that our core values in the Wagner family have given me context to just speak affirmingly into the lives of our kids. The one that happens most frequently is the core value of we show up for one another. That is a core value. When one Wagner is eyeball deep or something, when one Wagner is responsible for pulling off an event, the rest of the Wagners show up. And so whether it is my daughter, who every time it seems that my wife is putting on an event, she's right there beside my wife, helping plan it, helping execute it. This year it was my daughter's own wedding, which CJ kind of led the charge, and May was almost in a support role in terms of what that day needed to look like. But my son will do the same thing, where it's our family takes responsibility for kind of being integrally involved in the trunk or treat at our church, and Bryce and his girlfriend Morgan show up and help out. CJ and Jacob, good friends of ours, James and Kate Cosamoom, show up and help us put together the bones of that event. When CJ and Jacob were moving into their house and they had to rip out all of the drywall in the basement, and so we had to haul out a bunch of drywall out of the basement to the dumpster and haul in about 90 sheets of 12 foot long, double thick drywall for the basement walls. And Bryce showed up, and man, was the hardest working guy in the room that day. And so we're Wagners. We show up for one another. We don't let a Wagner languish in the most stressful, overwhelming moments of life. When, if at all possible, if humanly possible, we show up. And so that's a core value, shared value, and that allows us to call one another to accountability and to provide recognition and affirmation. And hey, I'm not a big words of affirmation guy, but I've got a few people in my life that when they say something affirming to me, it is worth its weight in gold. My wife, for one, my kids, and a couple other family members, and then the pastor of my church, Warren Betcher. When Warren has a particular gift for um, really verbally, positively affirming people in moments that matter, and it's something that is very endearing, and it's been personally very meaningful to me. But when you're establishing your family brand, your mission statement, your purpose statement, having two statements that are kind of core to the mission and purpose of what are we doing and what's the desired outcome, and then our core values, having 5 to 10 statements. I'll mention here, I've mentioned many other times, but Melissa and Chris Smith run an organization called Family Brand. We have found their curriculum very helpful and very beneficial to helping us through those conversations. And very crucial for us is our kids. We did not do this when our kids were young. I really wish we had access to that curriculum 15 years ago, because then we could have gone through the curriculum and then announced it to the kids that, said, hey, here's our core values. Let's memorize them together. Today it was, we just did this within the last year or so, and it was much more difficult because the kids are 22 and 19 when we're doing this, and we have to give them a choice. We have to give them a voice in this. They have the right to refuse, to say, no, I'm not going to that's not how I want to show up. I don't want that to be common. If you want to show up, that's fine. That's not how I want to show up. So that's it having the opportunity. This is meaningful and to do at any stage of life, and in any context. But it is especially meaningful when you can do it when the kids are young, and you can kind of bring them along and raise them in it. Now, we were kind of blessed when we were going through it with our kids. Our kids were kind of putting back to us to say, hey, listen, Mom and Dad, we see the value in this, but really all we're doing is putting finer points on mission-driven statements that we've lived by and you've raised us by our whole lives. So all we're doing, we're like, yes, and that's why it's so important that we all agree on it, that we all articulate it together. And yeah, but we've been doing it. This is like trying to explain why I swing the baseball bat the way I swing the baseball bat. I've been swinging a baseball bat like that for 12 years now. And so okay. That was personally very encouraging and affirming for us, which is a core value. But it also is, it was an interesting process. Now, what was also very interesting is that, Bryce's girlfriend Morgan sat in on some of this. CJ's now new husband was sitting in on this while they were engaged, and so it was new content for those two, and having them sit in and contribute was actually very valuable, because now it can be, hey, this is what we're trying to do together, and you're part of that. And you're going to have the option, as you establish your own family unit, to kind of deselect or to redefine some of these things for how you want your branch of the tree to function and operate, what the desired outcome of your branch of the family tree will be. And it may very well be different than ours, and that's okay. When you're in your 20s, we did talk about getting your mentors. We also said in your 20s, you want to have a plan to outgrow your mentors. So in your 30s, you want to be upgrading your mentors. Okay. You want to have both formal and informal relationships with those mentors. And you want to, and what I mean by that is we have a couple of people in our sphere who we may only see once or twice a year. But man, the time we get with them is super, super valuable. And it's frequently informal. It's just, and to just sit and ask questions and hear about how they're thinking about business, how they're thinking about family, how they're thinking about ministry and life, and thinking through that is, and learning from that. You can get a lot done by just listening and asking questions in a really short period of time with the right person. And so you want to have maybe a couple of informal mentors, but then have a couple of formal mentors, people who are holding you accountable for specific actions or inactions in your life. I mean, if you are a part of a faith community, you may have kind of a couple of guys in your sphere who kind of hold you accountable for doing things that are, for not doing things that would be deteriorating for your relationship with your spouse. And we all have a list of things that we've got to avoid and things like that. But have a couple of mentors who are formal mentors, who are people who are anywhere from 5 to 25 or 30 years ahead of you, people who have achieved some of the things you want to achieve, become the person you want to become, and put yourself in a context and to learn and to listen. I would also add here, I would also add here that formal coaching. If you're not working with a coach, I would encourage you, again, formally or informally, to allocate some resources, some time, possibly some money, to engage a coach, someone who's going to help you be continuing to focus on those existential questions, your own branding personally and for your family, help you establish and be accountable to those core values and how you're showing up consistently or inconsistently in those core values. That's where mentors come into play, and that's where coaches come into play. I will also say, and this is something else that in our family we had to normalize. Because in my world, you didn't go to a counselor until like you were ready to, are you suicidal? Are you seeing a counselor? Versus the definition today that we have is prophylactic counseling. So, like a prophylactic before you have sex with somebody because you want to avoid pregnancy. We don't want to get to a crisis, so we go to a counselor prophylactically. We go, we recognize, hey, I'm not quite showing up. My tone to my kids has been sharper than I think it needs to be. Let me go see if I can vet out some of what's going on in my own world. And hey, I'm 52 and I'm still digging up crap from my past and putting words to it, putting titles to it, realizing how it has shaped me and what it's brought out in me, positively in some cases, negative in most cases. It is so counseling is really for dealing with the trauma that we've been through or are going through. And hey, let's not fool ourselves. We have all had trauma. We've all struggled through some things. To get where you are today, you have overcome some stuff. And we need to not discount that. We need to not minimize that. We need to embrace that and say, yeah, I did overcome some stuff, and I probably didn't deal effectively with some of that stuff. I'll pick on my wife in a positive way, where going through COVID, we had some conversations, and she ended up going to see a counselor. And one of the things that came out was like, wait a minute, you lost your dad and 2 brothers within a 5-year period of time, and you haven't really cried about that. Like no tears have come out. That was an important point. Of course, when you stop and think about that for more than a couple of minutes and you just exhale and breathe for a minute, you go, I lost my dad and 2 brothers in 5 years. Boy, then the tears come. Then the pain comes. But then you can mourn effectively. Then you can grieve effectively. Then you can heal effectively. And now you can move on victoriously. Right. And so it's these kinds of things that we want to be able to handle. So mentors, formal and informal, coaches, counselors. In our 30s, we should be identifying people in each of those categories and committing resources, time, and possibly money to engaging people in those conversations. So we've covered a lot already, but let's acknowledge that the 30s is where life really starts to press in. We've got to spend more time working on our existential questions. We need to spend time articulating the brand for ourselves individually and for our family. How do we want to show up? What's the desired outcome and impact for our family? Mission statement, purpose statement, some core values, and engaging mentors, coaches and counselors to help us grow and develop. So I know that most of you listen to these episodes and you're really looking, all right, Wayne, we had fine personal growth, personal development, professional development, spiritual growth, development, relational development. That's all good. I'm here for the financial planning, Wayne. I'm here to hear, how should I be thinking about my financial planning, my financial growth. So let's get to that. I'm going to give you a series of questions here. It's really 10 questions and this is, if you're not doing this by the time you're in your 30s, I really want to encourage you to do this. And this goes back to some of the most foundational thinkers of our day have these things to say about, hey, take a couple of days every single year around the end of the year, the beginning of the year, do an assessment of the year prior, the year behind, do an evaluation of what the year ahead should look like, and spend a couple of days reflecting and strategizing, right? And so these are, this is 10 questions to ask for and do this every year. Just sit down and make this part of your year-end planning. 10 questions to ask. Okay. Number one, what is our monthly budget, and what one-time or recurring expenses do we expect through the next year? So what are we spending every month? And are there any one-off expenses that we expect, or recurring expenses that happen quarterly or something like that? What we want to get a sense of is how much money do we expect to go out the window, out the door over the course of the next year? And get specific about that. Get granular about that. Number two, how much revenue, i.e. income, are we anticipating to generate into the house over the next year? And so, and in what cadence is that going to occur? Do you get commissions as part of your compensation? Do they come quarterly? Do they come semi-annually? Do they come weekly? What's been an average commission year? Many of our clients get long-term incentive stock or options or bonuses, and those things show up once a year. And so we want to be in a position to understand what is going out, first of all, and second of all, what's coming in. Because that delta, are we happy with that trade-off? If we say, hey, according to the budget, $150,000 is going to go out this year. According to our revenue, we're going to bring in $110,000 this year. I have bad news for you. That is a formula for $40,000 worth of bad debt. And we talked about bad debt in the 20s, but bad debt is debt that we take on that's not generating positive cash flow. Like if you're going to go buy a business that generates positive cash flow, it's okay to take on debt to do that. If you're going to spend $40,000 on credit cards or an equity line of credit, and take on that debt because your spending was $150,000 and you only brought $110,000 into the house, that is problematic. That is hugely problematic. And so we've got to ask some other questions do we need to consider a job change? Do we need to consider starting a side hustle? Does a second spouse need to go to work? It's a hard question, especially in America. Do we need to live smaller? How do we need to live on less? And that's, and get granular in what can be cut. And this is where this conversation, rudimentary, functionally, is where Dave Ramsey has built a organization that's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, because these are questions that people don't ask. And when Ramsey says you have got to be an absolute militantly getting rid of bad debt, getting rid of your debt. He says all debt. I say bad debt. And you've got to avoid going out to eat. You've got to live poor. You got to buy stuff you've got to buy your clothes at thrift stores. You got to, you got to cut out the spending. And that may be a conversation that needs to be done, especially go back to your family values, go back to some of those core values. We live in a day where many, many families live on two incomes. But your family's one of your core values may be that mom stays home while the kids are below 12 years old or while the kids are in the house. And if that is a core value for your family, then the second spouse going to work is not the solution. Not by going out to eat may be part of the solution. Okay. And so we've got to not having 14 different subscriptions to various streaming networks may be part of the solution. But we have to, if your core value or your mission and purpose includes living on one income, then how can we maximize that one income? And how do we not have the second spouse feel that pressure to go back to work or to go to work during a time where our core values say he or she is supposed to be home? Okay, so that first question, what's the monthly outflow? Second question, what's the monthly inflow? Third question, are we happy with those two? And how do we need to functionally interact with our core values around the positive or negative delta around that? Number 4, what is our net worth? And this is what is net worth? What does that mean? Is a question I frequently get. Well, the net worth is very, very simply, what is the value of all of your assets minus all of your liabilities? And so your house is the easiest place to do this, right? Let's say your house is worth $500,000 and you have a $350,000 mortgage against it. Well, $500,000 value minus $350,000 debt equals $150,000. Now, if you want to get more granular than that, you can say, well, we would spend commissions and closing costs of $40,000 to get out of the house. And so that has to come off the $150,000. So you can, it depends on how granular, but for a starting point, just saying, hey, what's the gross value of the things that we have? And what is the minus the liabilities or the debts that we have to give us a net worth? And everything ultimately long-term strategically rises and falls off of this statement, because we can start to ask all kinds of great questions and developmental questions over the course of the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years once we have a clear picture of what the net worth is. Because let's say that the house is $150,000 and your 401k is $70,000. Well, that gives us a $220,000 net worth so far. Let's say there's $15,000 in the bank and there's a car, but I mean, when we look at the car, well, we owe $27,000 on it. It's probably only worth 20. Well, that goes in as a negative $7,000 line item, right? And so we figure out and the positives and the negatives on to come up with this net worth. Now, once we've established a net worth, then we can start having conversations about financial independence and things like that, because we need to accumulate about 25 times our annual spending in investments. And we're going to get the investments off the net worth sheet. Not everything on the net worth sheet counts towards the investments, but all of the investments count towards the net worth. And so once we've got the net worth, then we can back some things out and figure out, well, how much of this is kind of, we call it, how much of this is edible, right? So I can eat the 401k, I can eat the Roth IRA, I can eat the investment account, I can eat the cash, I can't eat the house, right? So, but we also have conversations with clients who get towards the end of the kids are out of the house and are looking at living in a much larger place than they really need. That's where the term downsizing comes from. And that's where you say, okay, well, now the $500,000 house is appreciated to $1 million. We've paid off the mortgage, but gosh, we could buy a place for $400,000 that had 2 or 3 bedrooms instead of the 5 or 6, and was on a much smaller piece of ground that costs much less to maintain. Or maybe we want to move into a condo association, or move to a place where the properties are where the landscaping is taken care of for us through an HOA or something like that. And maybe in that process, we can cash out some of the equity in the house and be able to convert that from one line item, the residence on the net worth, over into the investment line item. And that might help us down the road evaluate how close and how rapidly we can get to financial independence. Financial independence being that point at which we have enough in investments to live on at our current standard of living for the rest of our lives. And we need, rule of thumb is we need about 25 times our annual spending to be able to get to that point. So what's our monthly budget outflow? What's our revenue inflow? Are we happy with those things? What's the net worth? Are there bad debts? Number 5, are there bad debts that we need to be aggressively attacking this year? Bad debt, something that does not generate cash flow. This is student loan debt. This is today, especially it could be car loan debt. Car loan interest rates are really bad right now. Typically 7 to I've seen 10, 11%. That is not good debt. You cannot eat the car. And the car is not an appreciating asset, it is a depreciating asset. It is a cost line item for your standard of living. And so one of the proudest moments I've got so far with my son-in-law, Jacob, is we had this conversation about he had gone out and bought a truck and he was paying a lot in a monthly payment. We had this conversation around his budget. And next thing I know, he's driving a truck that's looks like it's maybe 7 or 8 years older. It's got a couple of rust spots on it and that kind of stuff. I'm like, what happened? Where'd that come from? He's like, well, my payment on this is half what the old payment was. And he said, I still need to drive a truck, but I could do it and I can do it cheaper. And that leaves me more money in each month to do the things that are important for our standard of living. I don't need to spend as much on a car. Wow, man. Huge move, especially for, hardworking blue collar guys who, the truck's kind of a definition of who they are. I was super proud of Jacob on that decision, but, how do we attack bad debt? Let's figure out how to pay down the credit card debt, or pay off the student loan debt, debt that is not generating positive cash flow for us. That's number 5. Number 6, what areas is our net worth growing organically? This will have something to do with that good debt scenario, because we might have some things that are so let's say, for instance, you went out and you bought a rental property. Let's say you bought a $250,000 rental property that you put some money down on, and it's making $100 a month positive cash flow. It's making $100 a month positive cash flow, and it's also appreciating at, let's say, 3% a year. So that $250,000 property, when it appreciates at 3% this year, is going to add $7,500 to your net worth. Well, that's $625 a month of what otherwise would be systematically monthly saving, $625 a month, to add $7,500 to your net worth over the next year. So that's something that you don't have to think about. You don't have to take action on. You don't have to physically take money out of cash flow to go save that money. That money is automatically building up just by the appreciation of this asset that you went out and purchased. Another way would look at your 401k. If you're systematically saving money into your 401k and your company is matching that money. So let's say you make $100,000 a year, you're putting away 10%. So you put away $10,000 a year, which is about $800 and some dollars a month. And then your company, let's say, is matching 6%. Well, that means there's $16,000 this year that's getting added to your net worth without you taking any significant action. You don't have to eliminate a payment on something. You don't have to pay off a debt. You don't have to. You don't have to. You don't have to find that cash flow on a monthly basis to set it aside. It's just kind of organically growing on your behalf. Oh, by the way, if you're back to that rental property, we talked about the increase in value of the real estate itself, but let's not discount the fact that you're having the renter pay off your mortgage. You took on the risk of the mortgage, but now the rent is being paid to pay off that mortgage. So let's say that you're paying off 2% of a $200,000 mortgage each year. Well, that's an additional $4,000. So you look at that rental and you say, well, it's only generating $100 a month. in additional free cash flow, but it's appreciating at $7,500 per year, and you're paying off $4,000 of the mortgage. Suddenly, you have almost $1,000 a month that's accruing and accumulating on your net worth statement just out of that one asset. And so this is where, and then on the 401k, we talk about the systematic regular savings. But then as the stock market goes up over time, you put that $10,000 in, you get the matching dollars, and then that $16,000 grows with the stock market. And let's say over time that the stock market does 7 to 9%. So another area I would differ with Dave Ramsey when I hear him say 10 to 12%, because over 20 and 30-year periods of time, the stock market returns just, look more like 7 or 8 over most rolling periods of time. So I don't want to oversell and overpromise. We always want to we want to underpromise and overdeliver. And so if I tell you to expect 7 or 8 and you get 8 or 9, awesome. I don't want you going in and expecting 10 to 12 and then figuring out on the back end of your career, you got to work an extra 6 or 7 years because you only got 7 or 8. So we always want to underpromise, over-deliver in these things. But this is where we're talking about how your net worth is growing organically. And so this is, again, it's paying down the mortgage, increasing property values, saving into your 401k, your Roth IRAs, saving money systematically into a savings account, money market account, college accounts for the kids, investment accounts, increasing value in a business that you one day hope or plan to sell. So these are all areas that your net worth can be going up. And some of it may be active, or you've got to be proactive to physically take money and go put it somewhere. But some of it will be just organically growing because of the value of the assets that you own. Okay. So number 7, review your estate plan. Are your wills up to date? Make sure that your power of attorney, healthcare directives, and beneficiaries are up to date. And so if you want to, I went a little bit deeper on this when you're in your 20s, but you want to probably go a little deeper when you're in your 30s with the estate attorney, because you'll probably, in addition to a will, power of attorney, healthcare directive, healthcare power of attorney, you'll probably also want to add a trust. So for instance, when we had 2 small kids at home, and I've got a couple $1 million worth of life insurance on me, and we've got a couple $1 million in assets in the business or retirement accounts or things like that. And May's got, a couple $1 million worth of life insurance on her. Well, if she and I go down in a common plane crash when the kids are 10 and 13, like, I don't want to hand the 10 and 13-year-old the keys to like $4 or $5 million worth of insurance proceeds and value of a house and retirement accounts and all the rest. That's crazy, right? So you want to put that in a trust and put somebody you trust in charge of the trust, as the trustee of the trust. So you want to put somebody that you trust in charge of those assets so that they can distribute them for the beneficiaries and give them some direction. Right. And so we put some limitations in our first draft when the kids were small, and we didn't get it all right. Now I put some things in there like the trustee could distribute up to $25,000 on the birth of a child within wedlock. Now, I put that in there, not wanting my 14-year-old to figure out she could make 25 grand a year by getting knocked up once a year if mom and dad were gone. The flip side is, if I had that to do over again, I would raise some different questions about, or put some different wording in there, because if my underage daughter did get pregnant, I wouldn't want her feeling the pressure to go marry the baby daddy just because she's pregnant. And so, as our own values have evolved over time. We also put in those original documents that the trustee could fund our kids' startup of a business, but we did not authorize a trustee to help fund the acquisition of a business. Well, one of the things we found out is that one of the fastest ways to accelerate wealth is to buy already functional businesses and then retool them and grow them and scale them. And so, that was a miss on our part in those early, that first iteration of documents. And May and I have updated them since then, updated this stuff since then. And we've got different wording and different verbiage in there. But you want to make sure your wills are current, your power of attorney, healthcare directives, You may have different feelings in terms of what steps you want taken and how over what period of time to keep you alive artificially. And very, very importantly, make sure your beneficiaries are up to date. Your insurance policies and your retirement accounts in particular are going to go by beneficiary. It will not go through the will. The will has nothing to do with who gets your retirement plan at work or who gets your life insurance. And so make sure that the beneficiaries on those assets are updated. Number 8, review your insurance planning. Do we need to go out to bid on the car insurance, the homeowners insurance? Are we happy with our property and casualty coverage? Do we have enough life and disability insurance? Here's a quick primer on life and disability insurance planning. So if I'm trying to get you to retirement or financial independence, I said that the rule of thumb is that we want to have about 25 times your annual spending available for investment to be able to pull 4% a year off of that bucket of money and have your money never run out. Right? Well, if that's the mindset when you're 60 or 65, but you're 35 or 37 with 3 kids and a wife at home, and you go down in a plane crash, is it fair to say that we want your wife to have the same standard of living that you're living at now? And if that's the case, then we probably need somewhere around 25 times your current cost per year to be able to support that lifestyle all the way through. Now we can pull it apart and we can say, hey, we're going to pay off the mortgage so that payment goes away, and we're going to put money away for the kids' college one time instead of saving it over in the next 10 years or 15 years. You can absolutely do that and kind of get to a more refined number. But at its fundamental case, if you're making $100,000 a year, round figures, I need about $2.5 million in assets to replace that income permanently for your spouse. And most of the people that are making $100,000 a year are not carrying $2.5 million worth of insurance. Now, again, we can go back to the net worth sheet and we say, well, there's $150,000 in the retirement account, so that can come off, and there's $50,000 in cash, and there's $50,000 in the kids' college accounts. So yes, we can whittle that number down. But evaluating life insurance and how much coverage you have is really, really crucial, especially while you're in your 30s and 40s and your net worth is not caught up, and you're in this 15 or 20-year season where kids are being raised. They're very expensive. You got all the expenses and anticipated expenses associated with weddings and college and all of this other stuff. And it's all riding on that main breadwinner or both spouses' ability to bring in the cash flow. And so, and that's apart from the fact from asking some bigger existential questions like, hey, if mom and dad are both each making $100,000 a year and one of them dies, how quickly do we want the other spouse to have to return to work when there's 3 kids at home? And what other expenses will be incurred in terms of child care, trauma counseling, and all the rest around that parent going down. So I'm making a case to buy a lot of life insurance. Here's what I'm not doing. And hear me loud and clear on this. Life insurance is not an investment. When you're in your 30s and 40s and you need a boatload of life insurance while your net worth catches up with your spending and your lifestyle costs, do not buy permanent life insurance to the tune of tens of thousands a year in insurance premiums and have to sacrifice putting money in your retirement accounts or kids' college accounts or Roth IRAs so that you can fund the insurance premiums. Buy term insurance and then use Roth IRAs, use 529 accounts, use your other college savings accounts, your retirement account to do the actual investing. Life insurance long-term is a terrible investment. There are purposes and situations where we need cash flow or permanent life insurance. There absolutely are situations where we need that stuff, but it is not for these really high death benefits that we need to provide while you're in your kind of 30s, 40s, and 50s, while your net worth is really growing. If you're in your 30s, go buy 25 or 30-year term insurance that's going to last long enough for you to get the mortgage paid off, get the mortgages on the rental properties paid off, get the kids through college, get the kids married off. This is where you've got the really heavy, thick season. If you want to buy a couple $100,000 worth of death benefit for stuff that's always going to be around, I'm not violently opposed to that. That is a very low priority in my mind relative to having the right amount. Because listen, if you're the primary breadwinner and I'm the one that has to come have a conversation after the funeral with your spouse does not give one rip what kind of life insurance. Was it whole life, indexed universal life, variable life, universal life, term insurance? They do not care what kind of life insurance it is. They care about one thing: how many zeros is on that check? How fast do I have to go back to work? How am I going to pay the bills? That's all they care about. They do not care what kind of insurance was. They care how big's the check. And so there's a strategic nature to these things. And certainly if you've got an estate tax problem where your estate is large enough that you're going to have estate taxes, life insurance is one of the most, and I would say permanent cash value life insurance is one of the most cost-effective ways to prepay and pre-plan for the payment of estate taxes. If you've got a complex family situation where you've got kids from a couple of different relationships and things like that, permanent cash value life insurance can be a great way to protect the benefits at death for one side of a blended family or the other. But by and large, for most folks, buying the right amount of death benefit and getting it for a 20, 25, 30-year period of term insurance where the premiums can't go up and they can't take it away from you as long as you pay the premiums. That is going to work and fit the bill in 90 to 95% of cases. Now, I'm going to do a quick primer here on disability insurance too, because disability insurance, you go back to that $100,000 a year income. So if you make $100,000 a year, and let's say that your disability company will cover up to 60% of your income with disability insurance. So you're making $8,500 a month and you're disabled and you can't do your job anymore. So the company is going to give you $5,000 a month because that's 60%. So you end up with $5,000 a month instead of $8,500 a month. And because the company was providing that to you as a benefit, the company was paying the premiums on that. Therefore, the benefits to you are taxable as income. So it's not $5,000 a month, it's $5,000 a month and then minus taxes. Okay. So that's a reason to consider an individual disability insurance policy. By the way, there are a number of other limitations on group plans. So for instance, let's say you make $200,000 a year, but $100,000 of it's salary and $50,000 of it's bonus and $50,000 of it is long-term incentives. Well, your group disability plan traditionally only covers your base. It doesn't cover your bonus and your long-term incentives. It doesn't cover commissions. And so if you're in a variable income role, consider purchasing a disability insurance contract that will cover some of that variable income. And you can also, if you're paying for the premium yourself, then the benefits from that premium or benefits from that policy, if you ever collect them, are tax-free to you. So if you buy a $5,000 monthly benefit, but you're paying the premium and you're not deducting the taxes, that premium for your taxes, then if you're ever disabled, the $5,000 that comes in is actually tax-free, as opposed to the company's policy, which is before taxes. So there's reasons to think about long-term disability policies, long-term disability insurance, especially for people in variable income roles. Uh, Life insurance is a conversation every couple in their 30s really needs to have. And the goal here is not to incentivize the spouse. By the way, here's your protection. The spouse can't collect if they're complicit in your death. Okay, so it's there's the old saying, "Oh, well, I'm worth more dead than alive. I gotta sleep with one eye open." Well, not really, because she can't collect if she's the one who murders me. Okay, so the courts have ruled on that a few times. So we're deep into this at this point. We're 8 questions out of 10. Question number 9: review the investment portfolio. This is investment allocation, performance, what cash flow needs, what's my allocation of stocks to bonds, what kind of equities am I in, as we how am I planning to protect those early years of financial independence? Do I have sufficient cash flow set aside for emergencies? Do I have a sufficient emergency fund in place? But review the investment portfolio. And then that big question, review, this is question number 10. Where are we relative to financial independence? This is, and you don't need to sweat this. You don't need to be, oh my goodness, I got to get to this number. But the rule of thumb is we need about 25 times our annual spending in order to be able to be financially independent. I don't use the word retirement a lot because I want you financially independent, which means you're able to walk away. The most crucial thing people do is have purpose when they get to their 60s, 70s, and 80s. People who don't have purpose die sooner than people who do not. And so if your job is enjoyable, it lights you up, it challenges you, it gives you reason and purpose in life, I'm not going to be the one encouraging you to quit your job just because you've gotten to your number. I'm going to be asking the questions about, hey, you can afford to quit your job. Do you love it? Do you enjoy it more than you hate it? If you weren't going to do your job, we have a client this year that answered this question so great. Financially independent, early 50s, they're in a great spot. Philosophical question I asked is, look, you never have to work another day in your life, but man, you're really well compensated and your next job should pay you even more. And over the next 10 years, you could build some silly, like stupid money if you want to work another 10 years or even another 5 years. But you have to ask the question. It's appropriate to ask the question, do you have something in your life that you really feel called to or drawn to? And that guy and his wife, and I really hope that he or both of them will come on the podcast at some point, um, eh, decided, after some prayers, some meditation, lots of conversations with each other and with some mentors, came to the conclusion, came to the decision, and said, "Hey, you know what? We're gonna step. He's going to step away from the professional life, and they're going to pursue becoming personal coaches." Because they see enormous value in coaching others to lean into and to live into their values, articulate their values and then live into those values. And so that's what they want to take their next phase of their evolution, their next leg of their journey, and pour themselves into others, agnostic of the money or the wealth that can be generated. They got enough money, they don't have to work. So now they want to take their time and effort and their accumulated expertise and pour that into others. And that would be those two people, barring some dread disease or something we don't know about. Those people are mission driven, purpose driven people. By God's grace, they'll live good long lives because they have mission and purpose and reason to get up and go do things that they're passionate about every day. And that's something that they can do. That's not like working in a coal mine that at some point you just can't do it anymore. Right. And so I want to encourage you to be thinking about financially, where are you on this trajectory of becoming financially independent, not for the sake of, hey, once I get to my number, I can quit, but for the sake of, once you get to the number, you have options, you have the choice. And I hope that you're doing something that you like more than you hate every day. I hope your career is not drudgery to you. I hope that there's mission and purpose and fulfillment, but to the extent that it does wear and tear, or it is physically demanding and you can't do it, let's say into your 60s, we want to get a gauge in your 30s about what does this trajectory look like financially, and how far along on this journey are we towards where we need to be so that you're able to walk away and be financially independent. So those are 10 questions that we would ask. And I would encourage you to take time once a year at the beginning or end of the year and do an assessment. Do an assessment of the year behind. How'd you do estimating what your savings was going to be? How'd you do estimating how your net worth was going to grow? And then start to lay out a forecast for what comes next. Like what do we expect from the year ahead? I hope this has been valuable for you. Thank you so much for joining us here on another episode of the Envision More podcast. Reach out to us anytime. It's our role in life. It's our mission, our purpose. What lights us up and fulfills us is A, helping you envision more, and B, helping you accelerate towards those goals and that mission, vision, and purpose that you have for your life. Thank you again. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Envision More podcast with Wayne Wagner Jr. of Visionary Wealth Management. We hope you were encouraged and inspired by the conversation today. If you want to dig deeper into the show notes or Wayne's work at Visionary, you can find us at envisionmore.com. That's Envision with a Z. Advisory services are provided through Wealth Plan Investment Management. Wealth Plan Investment Management and Visionary Wealth Management are separate entities. The content is developed from sources believed to be providing accurate information. The information in this material is not intended as tax or legal advice. Please consult legal or tax professionals for specific information regarding your individual situation. The opinions and material provided are for general information and should not be considered a solicitation for the purchase or sale of any security. Thanks for listening.